that. He actually let the beans go on that one.
Absolutely. That's ultimately, if you're going to have a global government, you first have to break down the current world structures. We are built now on the sovereign nation state. That is, that there are borders, that there are political and economic entities within those borders, and that the national sovereignty is the ultimate ruling authority. If one wants to change that and create a global ruling authority, one first has to knock down all of those national sovereignties. And the way to do that is create chaos. And that's what various phony crises like global warming or actual crises like massive migrations, which are synthetically caused by creating wars and revolutions in those countries. That's what happens. When you have millions of people flooding into an area, governing authorities become ungovernable. That makes it easier then for people to accept global rule. In most third world countries, and increasingly in the first world countries, the United Nations has a huge presence. When you go into third world countries, it's very obvious because you see United Nations personnel, United Nations trucks, United Nations buildings everywhere, from the United Nations World Health Organization to UNICEF, UNESCO, UNEP, all of these different organizations. Particularly with regard to the migration issue, you have the United Nations High Command for Refugees, the UNHCR, active with thousands of personnel, massive resources. That all comes from us, the taxpayers. And so our money is already being transferred to the UN. With every one of their new programs, they create more chaos and create more crises, which they then can turn around and say, oh, we have a solution for that. It's more money and more control and more programs. When you have that operating on a regular basis, growing and growing, you have all of these elitists in their foundations, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, etc., promoting these and funding all of the activist groups that are calling upon us to expand these programs. Then you have a constant lobbying force for expanding the world government. And that's where we're headed.
You know, it's been interesting how over the last 30, 40, 50 years, we play this game where, oh, no, we're not moving towards a global government. And then all of a sudden something comes up and it's very obvious that's what's happening. And then they go back under again and said, no, that's not what we're really doing. And if you look at the European Union, it's a perfect example of that. First, it started out as a coal treaty. You know, then there's a common market. And then it moves to the next stage. And then it's the next stage. And the people that started, they know doggone well where they're going right from the start, Bill.
Well, yes, and that's what we've been at pains to document for many years, because when you actually collect all of their various speeches and their writings, particularly where they are speaking to themselves and among themselves, they're very clear about it. One of the most telling admissions against interest is from the famous British historian for the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Clear back in 1931, he was speaking to a large group in Stockholm of one-worlders, and he said, it is because we are trying to wrest this national sovereignty from the hands of nations that we must deny with our lips what we are doing with our hands. And he went on to expound on that and to say that we can't say it openly because the world is not ready for this yet. They would persecute us as heretics, but national sovereignty must be destroyed. And of course, Richard Haass, who is now the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, the brain trust for the one-worlders here in the United States, said just a few years ago in one of his main editorials for Project Syndicate, the big global syndicated column that is funded by George Soros, that sovereignty has to go by the wayside, that globalism is the wave of the future. Of course, he is featured regularly on all of the major talk shows, MSNBC, NBC, CNN, etc. Recently, when the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, was confronted with this claim that they are against national sovereignty, they immediately issued a statement. Oh, no. The CFR is a membership-based organization that respects national sovereignty of every nation and is founded upon that principle. Well, we've reported over and over and over again from their own flagship publication, the Foreign Affairs. There are various programs that you can watch on the CFR.org channel. They're quite open about it. But when confronted with this in public, they will simply deny with their lips what they are doing with their hands.
And that's why even threats of Texas to secede represent fractures in this whole thing, that they come in and they just, if you look at all of the dire predictions about this separation, it's really clear they're concerned because the Brexit represents a threat to the whole ongoing agenda. And that's when it's interesting to watch, Bill, because that's when the fangs come out. Up until that point, it's all, I call it a smiley fist. It's all smiles, but there's a fist right behind it that if you don't go along with it, then all of a sudden, pow, they come out. When caught admitting it, they run back and deny it.
Yeah, during the Brexit debate that was sponsored by The Spectator in London, I did a column on that, and we embedded in it a couple of the videos there, speaking for the Brexit, for leaving, for Nigel Farage and Daniel Hannan. And speaking against it were Sir Leon Britton, who is a former commissioner for the European Union. And he just simply lied through his teeth. He said, oh, that's absolutely ridiculous. There's no effort to destroy national sovereignty in the European Union. And we don't ever do anything in the European Commission or the European Parliament that is contrary to national interests. It was just simply outright denial. It was good to see, however, that when they took the poll going into the debates, most of the people were still opposed to leaving. By the end of the debate, Farage and Hannan had reversed most of those numbers to where now it was vastly disproportionate. Most of the people came over to the Brexit side.
Bill Jasper, senior editor of The New American and author of Global Tyranny Step by Step and also The United Nations Exposed. Any closing thoughts? Don't forget some websites, Bill.
Well, yes, I think that Americans should really take great encouragement from this. What we are seeing all over Europe and with this upcoming Brexit in the United States, with the insurgencies of Bernie Sanders, a phony insurgency, and the Trump campaign, this shows that people are very concerned. They're waking up. They're saying, hey, we don't want the status quo. We don't like what the elites are doing. We want some outsiders to come in. And those are all good signs. What we need to do, however, is take people from that initial stage of awareness and give them a much more sophisticated understanding of what is happening so that demagogues cannot simply take their growing concern and anger and manipulate it. That's what we've seen too long in the past. So I would just encourage people to come to our website. That's thenewamerican.com. And we've got a lot of information there going in depth on all of these issues.
Bill Jasper, thanks once again. Dennis Cuddy will be our guest next week. All things planned. It's Memorial Day weekend, so we'll do a